Well, hi. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show from Trust Insights. I am Katie, joined by Chris and John. We are still talking about personal branding. So we started with helping set up a basic website, get some plugins, set up some tracking. Then we moved on to setting up an simple email newsletter so that you can reach out to people, let them know what you're working on. But now we're moving on to content curation because, well, you need to build a network of people and you need to have some place to tell people, to let people know that you have a newsletter. So you need to have followers. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So Chris, content curation, take it away.
All right. You need content, you need stuff to share. And it has been practiced, well-defined in the marketing and PR industry for last 15 years that you should be sharing stuff that demonstrates that you have a basic understanding of your industry, the notable people and publications that are part of it, and ideally sharing a blend, 60, 40, 70, 30, other people's stuff that provides value to the people who do follow along. And then obviously you earn the right over time to share your own stuff. So one of the challenges that people face with content curation is that it takes a lot of time, and it's not always something that people are willing to make time for. So what we want to do today is show two different ways to do content curation that can help accelerate the process a little bit, and then talk through some of the mechanisms for that. For this, you're going to need at least four different free services. And those free services are If This Then That, which you can find at ifttt.com. We'll go ahead and put this in screen share mode. This is a service that essentially takes other services and kind of glues them together. So that's going to be one of the things you're going to want to have. The second thing you're going to want to have for just overall monitoring of your personal brand, we talked about this 2 episodes ago, but it's going to come back here, is TalkWalker's free alerts service. This is going to be useful for keeping an eye on when people are talking about you, so that you know if something has happened that's relevant. You're going to want the free Pocket application from getpocket.com that allows you to tag and store and also explore and learn and find content from different sources. And of course, you're probably going to want, you will want Google Sheets, right, which is the free spreadsheet software from Google. One optional additional piece for the more advanced version is Google Analytics, and we'll get to that in a minute. So with content curation, first thing we got to do is we got to get content. We got to get stuff from somewhere. And that's where applications like Pocket really come in handy, where there are things that explore and learn, discover. Let's go ahead and just poke around in here.
So Chris, while you're pulling that up, is Pocket the only type of free service, or are there others? Because I know I used to use Feedly, for example.
Yep, there's Feedly. There's so many. There's like Vienna.
There's Flipboard.
Yep. Is out there, and there's a ton of these different services. The one thing that you'll want to do is you'll want to check to see if it is supported by If This Then That, at least for this example that we're going to be doing today. So let's go ahead and actually take a quick look into the catalog to see what services are supported. And you can see there's a crazy large number. So let's see if Flipboard is supported. It is not. So that would not be a go. Feedly is in there. There's blog feeds that you definitely want to have in there. And then there are, and I know Pocket is in here. So for this example, you want to use something that's supported by If This Then That. So with Pocket, it's a question of going through and finding stuff that might be of interest to not only your audience, but to you as well. One of the rules of content, we call it the 3L rule, is if you didn't laugh, if you didn't love it so much that you're talking about it to your significant other, even when they asked you not to, or you didn't learn something, then there's a good chance that your audience isn't going to either. And so when we look at all of the different things in here, we see plenty of things that would be worth taking a look at. Part of content curation is just figuring out how stuff is going to resonate with your audience. So just looking through things that you might be interested in. Here, the history and psychology of clowns being scary. That one might be fun.
Terrifying.
Terrifying. And of course, what you see is that Pocket begins to store these things and then provides you to them. And there's a mobile app for it as well that allows you to read them later, as you can go through and take a look and see what's of interest. So that's the first part. We're going to bring in content that's worth sharing through here. Second thing we're going to do is we want to, again, make sure that if somebody is mentioning us, is sharing our content, is citing us, we want to promote them, right? We want to give them some limelight of our own if we have it. And that's where something like TalkWalker comes in handy. So let's go ahead and put in Trust Insights here, and I'll go ahead and sign in. I'm going to do as it happens, all results, agree to the terms and conditions. I'm going to create our alert. Okay, we have to go in and authorize our email to say that this is actually real and this is not just a spam bot.
And I appreciate you not showing your email inbox, not for proprietary reasons, but more for the scary OCD-ness that I would get by looking at your email inbox.
Yeah, my email inbox is not the prettiest thing in the world. It really isn't. So let's go ahead now and set up a password here. So it's I'm not a robot.
Well, that's debatable.
No, CAPTCHA. I love CAPTCHAs.
Okay. Now, as we saw, this is going to send us email. I don't personally want more email. It's not something that's like super exciting to me. So I'm going to turn email delivery off. And what you'll see down here is this RSS feed. This is really handy where this can actually, bring in RSS posts as it comes in and put it in, send it somewhere. So let's do this first exploration. I'm going to copy this RSS feed. I'm going to go to the if this then that, and we saw RSS is built in right here. I'm going to say I want a new feed item. I'm going to connect it, and I'm going to put in that TalkWalker feed. That's my first trigger. Next, I want to send this to a Google Sheet. I've got one pre-made here called example, not super exciting. I'm going to add a row to the spreadsheet. And with the spreadsheet name has to be an exact match. I'm going to create this action. And what this is going to do is it's going to take the alerts that come out of TalkWalker, and it's going to put them in as rows in this spreadsheet. Okay, we'll finish that up, and now that's running. So we're going to have in a spreadsheet, and by the way, we can't do this super live because if this then that only runs like every 6 hours, so you have to come back and do this later. But it will populate just those columns that we were just talking about. So we've got our mentions wired up into a spreadsheet. Now, the next thing we want to do is repeat the process with Pocket. So I've explored some content. Let's check for things like, see if there's any good articles. Nothing in my list. Let's do explore.
You know, what I like about this, especially with the mentions, is it cuts down on the errors for copy and paste. So if you have other people on your team that you've said, I need you to go find all of the mentions of our company, you know, the first thing they probably do is start Googling for, you know, all the mentions, and that can get unwieldy. You can get duplicates, you can have copy and paste issues, and this takes a lot of that headache out of it. So I think that in and of itself is a useful tool.
Definitely. So as you saw, we've added a bunch of new articles here. Now we're going to go back into our if this then that. We're going to create ourselves a new applet. And we're going to repeat the same process we just did, except instead of an RSS feed, we're going to use our Pocket feed. And every time I put a new item into my Pocket, I again want to wire it back up to that Google Sheet.
Now, I'm assuming that people use services like Feedly or Pocket to post directly to their social feeds when they, you know, like something or tag something or want to share something. So they probably skip this step, and then they probably separately are looking for mentions on themselves to be able to share. And what you're doing is saying, actually, you can do it all at once in one place.
Yes, that's right. And there's two reasons for that. First, with social mentions, unless you have a really, really unique name that literally nobody else uses except you, like Throat Wobbler Mangrove, for example, the old Monty Python joke, there's a good chance you're going to get a lot of garbage in your social monitoring, right? I compete with an epidemiologist. I compete with a deceased actor. I compete with at least one of those, university president. John competes with a basketball player. So if you just wire something straight into your social feed, you are risking throwing an awful lot of junk in there. And the second thing is that with social scheduling services, you don't want to do this stuff one by one. It's just terrible. So we're going to talk about that. But so now we've gotten these two services wired up to a Google Sheet. And in this Google Sheet, again, it's not something we can show live, but it would populated with the feed, the item, the title, the description, the URL. What we want to do from there is export this as a CSV file, right? So anytime we're working with social media services, we want to look at our data, delete the stuff that's not relevant. Again, those random mentions that don't make sense or spam bots or whatever. And then from there, we're going to go into a service and take the social scheduling service of your choice. We use and recommend a service called Agora Pulse. If you want to learn more about it, we have a link right here. And what you can do is bulk publishing. So we would take that CSV file that we just made from our Google Sheet, go into publishing here, and go into do bulk publishing. And I can import my CSV file of all the stuff. And as long as I've got a queue that's set up with the appropriate times, I can now queue up, 20, 30, 40 posts all at the same time. I've gone through and edited them in the spreadsheet and just load them in here, and you get a chance to see, to really cut down on the amount of time it takes to do some social scheduling. So that's I would call it the good enough way for most people to be able to assemble a lot of content that's useful and worth reading, and gives you the opportunity to take care of your social scheduling, maybe an hour or two a week, instead of, I've seen people at PR agencies take 8 hours a week to do social scheduling, which is just a huge time killer.
So I want to share a quick anecdote about my learnings with Agora Pulse and social scheduling. So up until recently, I was using a different social scheduling service, which was fine. It was good enough, but I didn't have access to the company accounts through that social scheduling service. It was only for my personal social accounts. And so I was going to two different places, primarily because I was stubborn and I liked the way I was doing it before, and realized I was creating more work for myself because I wasn't logging into Agora Pulse. I was one by one every single day scheduling updates and posts on behalf of the company, until finally I was like, okay, this is dumb. I have, 600 Asana tasks that are literally day by day. There's got to be a better way to do this. And so once I logged into Agora Pulse, poked around for a little bit and figured it out, I cut down the amount of time that I was spending doing that from literally half an hour every single day to half an hour one day a week, because I already had everything all drafted out. And it was, I'm telling you, it was a game changer. And why did it take me so long? Because I stood my own way. So that's the only reason. It's not because the system was difficult to use. It's actually very, very intuitive and easy.
Yep. So if you have the technical capacity to do so, the way that we approach social scheduling for a lot of our companies and new stuff is to take well-known blogs in our industry, and well-known publications in general, and pull in all the data about them and analyze them one at a time. Machines do it, we don't do it, for a lot of our keywords and topics and phrases, and then use that database to essentially publish out the content. So I'll show you a quick example of this. This is our software that we built in-house for doing this. And not to be obnoxious about it. It's just, we did this because we didn't want to spend time doing this all the time. So we load up our stuff, and then we see all the different variables that we can pull in, all the different scores, the actual text of all these posts. And it works out to about, I think, 1,500 or so blog posts a day. It's not a small amount of stuff. But in doing this, one of the things that we use our own link shortener. And there's a huge reason for doing that has to do with your personal brand. And that is, if you're using a link shortener that can talk to Google Analytics, you can get a better sense of what are the things that people interact with that you're sharing that provides value to your audience. Hey, share more of this stuff, or hey, share less of this stuff because this isn't the thing. The service that we use for that is a free open source tool. It is called Youll. It's a silly name. And again, if you have the technical capacity to do so, install this on your own server. There's a plugin for Google Analytics that allows you to track any link click that's sent through it, which is super valuable because, again, if we are going to places, for example, like Pocket, and we're getting all these different articles, if we use our own link shortener, then we can tell how many clicks we are sending to those places. Now, if you're working for a company and you're doing stuff to build your personal brand, but on behalf of the company, and you're sharing your company's content, wouldn't you like to know how much of a contribution you are making to the company's traffic goals? If you have a business partnership, for example, we're an IBM business partner. One of the things that I have to do every month is report to IBM, hey, here's how much traffic we sent you, because there's a good chance the program that we're in does not even talk to the web team, much less have access to their analytics. So we provide that reporting on their behalf. So using these free services, the link shorteners, A, makes your stuff look nicer because all of our stuff comes from trustinsights.news, and B, gives you analytics. So let's take a look at what that looks like.
So Chris, before we move on from that, one of the questions that we got from Brett was, can't you just use UTM parameters? And you can. You want to use the UTM parameters first on the URL that you're sharing, and then you want to shorten the link. The reason for that, and Chris can probably get more technical, is that a lot of the services, Facebook especially, will strip out the UTM parameters that you put in. Therefore, all that work that you did to tag all of the content correctly goes away. So by using Bitly or creating your own URL shorteners or any other service, you're protecting those UTM parameters when you're sharing it, so that services like Facebook and other social services won't strip out your tracking.
Exactly. Now, here's the other thing with UTM parameters, Brett. They only work if you have access to the Google Analytics account, right? So if you send a naked link, if you send a link to, say, marketingovercoffee.com with UTM parameters, and you don't have access to Marketing Over Coffee's Google Analytics, you can't see it, right? You don't know what's happened. Now, I will thank you in advance if you are sending traffic to marketingovercoffee.com, because that's our site. And we can see you, but you can't see you. You can't see what you've done. When you use a link shorten tied into Google Analytics with its measurement protocol, it doesn't matter what site you're sending traffic to, you can see it. So let's take a look. In Google Analytics, in our link shortener, I'm going to go to site content, I'm going to go to all pages.
And Chris, just to clarify, when you set up our own link shortener service, you also set up a view in our Google Analytics account just specifically to look at those shortened links.
Exactly. Okay, let's go to page title, because the short codes are not super helpful. And because of the way the service works, it brings in the redirecting page in as a page title. So now I can see in the last 7 days, these are the top 10 links that we've shared that got the clicks, right? So we have, some of my stuff. We have Institute for Public Relations, Copy Blogger, eMarsis, Acoustic, Digiday, Martech Zone. It's got a big selection here. But it's funny. We share stuff from places like Social Media Examiner, Search Engine Land, Marketing Land. We share stuff from all sorts of places, and these are the things that this week people are like, "Yep, those are the things I want to read about." This means that if we share stuff using social data, we can then use this to understand who is our audience, right? What are they interested in? I don't have to know every single thing about you to know what it is you're clicking on, right? We use this exact same link shortening technique in our Trust Insights newsletter. And the reason for doing that is that, again, we can track to see what the newsletter is doing and make sure that we're delivering content you care about. If we share some links and then, a week or a month later, we look in the data here and we go, wow, nobody liked these articles that we've been sharing, we know that we're not serving you the best. So when it comes to talking about what should we be doing to build our personal brand, we want to know. We want to know what people care about. So the beginner's method, which you talked about, which is using Pocket and using if this then that, will get you 70 or 80% of the way there, especially if you're clever and you have the ability, you know how to tie in link shorteners into a Google Sheet. You can then do 90, 95%. And then the more advanced version is running that own link shortening service and tying that into a back-end database that allows you to really process the data in advance, score it, make sure it's completely relevant to your audience, and then track to see what it is that is of interest to your audience.
So, Chris, we have another question about link shorteners, more of a comment, really, from Margarita. She's saying that she tried to push URL shorteners, but the external marketing agency said it would hurt the campaign's performance on quality scores on Facebook. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are I'd like to see a citation from that agency about where they got that.
Show me the test. Show me the AB.
And John is exactly right there, which is do an A/B test. Run half, do a campaign where half of it's in one condition, half it's in the other condition, and look at the results. And use the exact same copy, exact same stuff, just have one with a shortener and one without. And you'll find out very quickly whether or not that's true. In our experience, we've not seen that. In our experience, we've seen plenty of other things will hurt your campaigns, like terrible images, terrible copy, and terrible offers that nobody wants to any part of. Those typically matter more, but absolutely run an A/B test. I think that is the most impactful thing you can do, especially if the research that said agency is citing is older than March of this year. And again, we have said this on our podcast, on our newsletter, on everything. The world has changed. The behavior of the consumer, of the business person, whatever, that was before the pandemic is not the same as that person now. So you need to test everything. We also have a comment from Brian asking, how do we automate the collection of social metrics? Well, there's so many ways you can do this. One of the easiest ways that we've had really good success with for just basic dashboards, there's a package that we use called Supermetrics for Data Studio. And if you want to check it out, go to trustinsights.ai/supermetrics. Full disclosure, by the way, for the FCC, these are all affiliate links. If you buy something from them, we get a very small amount of money.
Well, and to that point, we're covering dashboards in next week's live stream. So please tune in and we will definitely dig into more of that next week. Yeah.
So Supermetrics is a good way of pulling it in just to the dashboard itself, if you want to do it that way. However, if you want like that data in for data analysis, you're going to need to connect to the social APIs themselves. So you'll need to have a coder on hand who can address those APIs and extract the data from them. And it's a little bit more work that way, but you then get to run pretty advanced testing and analysis on those data points to see like what are the things that you can do with that data. And especially when you want to bring in and blend data sources together, there's a lot you can do with that raw data, but it has to come in from the APIs. If you go to any of the social networks, for example, you go to developers.facebook.com, they provide you or your development team ample information as to what's supported, what's not, and things like that. And by the way, all the developer stuff for the most part is free. So as long as you've got the technical skill, you can bring in that data and not need to pay, some other third-party service, $300 a month just to bring in the exact same data that you could go get for yourself. Okay, let's talk about one other thing. For the sharing of content, some tools have pretty good analytics. And one of the things you're going to want to think about is when you're going to roll this kind of thing out. I'm going to look here in AgoraPulse, and we're looking at the audience. You can see engagement stuff, but one of the useful things is that they do provide you sort of here's when your users or your audience tends to be active. Let's go ahead and go into my Twitter account here. And you can see there's some decent spots of activity based on the data coming in. Here's the catch. This is only based on your data. So if you are posting at 9 a.m. every day, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, the most active times are going to be 9 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right? It's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So part of your curation strategy when it comes to sharing is to set up queuing times that are around the clock. I recommend if you're starting out and you've got the content because you've been using Pocket and stuff, that you start out with every 3 hours on the dot. So you're sharing essentially 8 times a day. You should be able to find enough content with services like Pocket and stuff like that to load those bins, and then do this for at least a week, ideally a month, just sharing. And then you can look and hear and see, okay, when are people most active? And after that testing period, then you can start to rearrange your queue times and say, like, okay, I have my normal queue time on a Wednesday is Wednesday at 9 a.m. But actually Wednesday at 10 a.m. is when there seems to be more activity on that day. So I'm going to move my queue time to fit the times when people are most active. And then once a quarter, maybe turn off your production queue, turn back on your testing queue, go around every 3 hours again and retest to make sure that your audience has not changed. After any kind of significant event, say like a pandemic, retest so that you're constantly updating your data and you constantly know when the best times are. And the catch with this is, and it's what's really nice about this in Agorapulse is it's different per channel, right? It is different based on where you're sharing stuff. And obviously some networks are not available, but when I look here for in the Trust Insights one, we see that the days and times are different, right? That hotspot Wednesday morning in my account is not here for the company account. Right? So they're different audiences. So it's important to make sure that you're doing it for each channel and then having cues in your social scheduling tool that are set for each audience for the way they behave. So don't try and do it all in one shot. This is the best time for everybody, because it's clearly not.
One of the most common questions that we hear is, how do I determine the best times to post on social media? So this is a really great way to approach it. But if you're just starting out, but you also have Google Analytics data, in a different episode of this live stream, we will be covering how to use your own Google Analytics data to set up a dashboard to determine best times to post on social media, again, using your own data. So there are a couple of different ways to figure this out. But if you are using a service such as Agorapulse, then this is absolutely a report that you should be using, because my network looks different from Chris's, looks different from John's, looks different from even the company, even though we all feed into that. And so you definitely don't want to just do, a direct copy paste of the exact schedule across the board.
Yep. Other thing I would suggest doing, and this goes back to Brett's question, is in the Google Analytics setup, make sure that you're not only doing source medium tagging, but do campaign tagging as well. Have each social channel have its own campaigns and stuff, and set out and differentiate, especially if you're doing it for yourself and your company. You want different tags, because what you can do obviously in Google Analytics is you can then create a segment in Universal Analytics for just your stuff. So I do this and my campaign, let's see. Save. I got a campaign.
This is where we need the radio transition effects.
As we're all just watching.
Exactly.
Watch the king.
Oh wait, I have to go back and look. But if you have your own segments, your own UTM campaign segments, then you can slice and dice all of your social shortening stuff into the different pieces based on those campaigns. So if you could set this up, for example, for yourself and say 5 of your friends, because your friends are just as nerdy as you are. You could then look at what your stuff, what the most clicked on stuff is for you, and then what your friends get clicks on as well. Because again, different audiences. Or even if you're doing, as we do, you're using the same tool for both social media and for email. I want to see maybe my email clicks behave differently than my social media clicks, and get a sense of, are those audiences different? So to summarize, content curation is how you prove your expertise, right? Prove that you're dialed into your industry. The basic way to do it is to use a service like Pocket and something like If This Then That to marry a bunch of different data sources together and send them to some kind of a database. In this case, from our example, a Google Sheet. Once you've got that, you edit that, and then you load it to a social scheduling tool, and it keeps things, relatively clean. If you're more advanced, you have a back-end database of some kind, which does exactly the same thing, but at a much larger scale and gets all your content ready. And then based on that, and if you have the technology available, you use a service like Google Analytics to track what the most shared stuff is, so that you're continuing to share stuff that your audience wants. And you can look at over time at what the trends are in the topics that people are most interested in. If you got questions, now would be the time. But if you don't have questions right now, but you disconnect from the live stream and 5 minutes later, you're like, I don't remember. I remember the question I was going to ask. Come on over to the Analytics for Marketers Slack. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, and you can join 1,400 other folks who are analytically minded. Any parting words, Katie and John?
Yeah, I just want to sort of pull it all together, the reason why we've been doing all of these different personal branding episodes. And so it's great to have a website. It's great to have a newsletter. But if you don't have a network, if you don't have followers, then you're just sort of speaking out into the void. And so one of the goals of this content curation is to build up a network of people who see the things that you post on social media. One, to demonstrate your authority, but also to let them know, hey, I have a website, I have a newsletter. Do you want to sign up for it? So it's this constant cycle of each of the digital channels feeding each other. And so that is part of that personal branding journey. Is if you don't have a place to let people know, hey, I have a newsletter, then what's the point of having a newsletter? So promoting that on your social channels, and then promoting your social channels within the newsletter once you get subscribers. And that becomes that cyclical feed of each other.
Yep. Donna asked, if you don't have the backend database, the first part of today's episode, I think you came in late, covers the basic setup for without using a database. All right. If there are no other questions, let's go ahead and roll on out of here. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast. And a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.